Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Haven't done a deck profile in a while, but I wanted to come at you. It's a deck I forgot that I rebuilt. I've had this deck rebuilt probably like a month, but it's Kethis the Hidden Hand. It's a Abzan Legendary Graveyard deck, so it's obviously legendary focused, but the whole point is you want to just cheat stuff out of your graveyard. But yeah, his effect, your legendary spells cost one less to cast, and then you can exile two legendaries from your graveyard until the end of turn. Each legendary card in your graveyard has the ability of you may play this card from your graveyard. To be honest, we don't really do the secondary effect all that much in this build. It's mainly just you're wanting to reduce the cost of your legendary spells. You normally have other things to bring stuff back from your graveyard, but as you guys know with my channel, the land count, I just run basics, 13 of each, because we're playing a 3-color deck, so 39 lands total. Feel free to do whatever you want with your mana base. I just choose to do it that way. I prefer it that way, easier for me. And we do have some basic land synergies, so that always helps. All right, we're going to start with the creatures first, because that's what we have the most of. So we got a Kataki Wars Wage, legendary, and my thing is with the legendary stuff, if it doesn't have a colorless mana symbol to be reduced, I don't play it. I don't think there's an exception to that in this deck, but we'll see. So yeah, all artifacts have at the beginning of your upkeep, sack this artifact unless you pay one. We don't have, I think we have 3 artifacts in this deck total, so should only really affect our opponents for the most part. Azusa, Lost But Seeking, she's a card that can be used in any green deck, but obviously because she's a legendary, just extra for us. Kadira, Caller of the Small. So we also have a token theme in this deck as well. So it's a 3/3 trample. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player for each token you control, make a 1/1 white rabbit token. Chatterfang has Forest Walk. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens are made plus that many 1/1 green squirrels. And then you can pay a black, sack X squirrels. Target creature gets +X, -X until end of turn. Yeah, good card. Eternal Witness. Grab something back from our graveyard, put it in our hand. When it ETBs, Grismold, trample 3/3 at the beginning of your end step. Each player makes a 1/1 green plant. Whenever a creature token dies, put a +1/+1 on Grismold. So that's a good thing. And just like I said, it has stuff dying and then gives us more token fodder. So Cabal, Console of Allocation. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, the player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. That's always good. Sorry. Veto, Thorn of the Duskrows. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. We also have a little bit of life gain in here, so that's good. Alenda, the Duskrows. Whenever another creature dies, you put a +1/+1 on her. Whenever she dies, you make X 1/1 white vampire tokens with lifelink. She has lifelink herself. We plan on having a lot of things die normally. This is one of my favorites. Michiko Kanda, Truth Seeker from I think it's Saviors of Kamigawa. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you, that player sacrifices a permanent. That's good for us. This one is fairly new. It's from last year. Namada, Primeval Warden, 3/4 with Reach. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. When you do, create a 1/1 green Sapperling. You can pay a green, sack a Sapperling, gets +2/+2 until end of turn, or you can pay a black and 1, sack 2 Sapperlings, draw a card. The main thing is just we're going to have our opponent's creatures dying quite often, so being able to make Sapperlings off that is nice, and they get exiled. This is a card I didn't run in the previous build. There is a previous video on this channel of this deck, and obviously this version's somewhat different. But this is a card that I forgot existed. So for 4 mana, it's a 2/2. It's a Savra, Queen of Golgari. Whenever you sack a black creature, you may pay 2 life. If you do, each other player sacrifices a creature. That's great. And whenever you sack a green creature, you may gain 2 life. So the life gain, that's a small thing, and we'd like that. But the main thing is if you sack black creatures, that ability to make everybody else sack something is great. Taste of Karlov. If a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers additional time. Creature tokens you control have vigilance and lifelink. You see the synergy there. World Shaper. I think if you're trying to mill yourself, this is one of the best cards, especially if we don't have blue in our colors. Whenever it attacks, you can mill the top 3 cards of your library, and then whenever it dies, you put all lands from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. Ageless Entity. Whenever you gain life, put that many +1/+1 counters in Ageless Entity. Like we said, we are trying to gain some life in this deck. Angel of Suffering. If damage would be dealt to you, prevent that damage and mill twice that many cards. That's a big one, a great way to mill ourselves, like I said, when we don't have blue. Ao the Dawn Sky, one of the new dragons, spirits from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Flying Vigilance. Whenever it dies, you choose one. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put any number of non-land permanents with total mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest in your bottom library in a random order. or you can put 2+1/+1 counters on each permanent you control that's a creature or a vehicle. Well, we don't run vehicles, but this guy's a new addition, and I'm really happy with him. I think he's awesome, and I love the new artwork. So Endrixar Master Breeder, for 5 mana, he's a 2/2. Whenever you cast a creature, you make X/1/1 black Thrall creature tokens, where X is that spell's mana value. And whenever you control 7 or more Thralls, sack Endrixar Master Breeder. So basically, the whole thing is, if you have a sack outlet with tokens, you can basically cast a creature, and then you make tokens, and then you can sack those tokens to get some sort of benefit, and then you can keep casting creatures and keep doing it. So it's a pretty cool card. All right, Junji, the Midnight Sky, 5 mana. It's a 5/5 flying menace. Whenever it dies, you choose one. Each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life. Or put target non-dragon creature card from a graveyard on the battlefield under your control. You lose 2 life. We can use either of those effects. Obviously, we'll have a ton of stuff in our graveyard. Mazarek, one of my favorites, for 2/2 for 5 mana. Whenever a player sacks another permanent, put a +1/+1 on each creature you control. You saw that Michiko Kanda, I think was her name, the one that says whenever you're dealt damage, your opponent has to sack something. Obnixilis, one of my favorites. This is one of our easiest cards to end the game with. I use him in my Yarok deck as well, and I can't decide. I mean, he's great in that deck, but this deck you have a lot of ways to get out a lot of lands at once in this deck. Plus, he's a legendary creature, so that's great. 3/3 with landfall. Whenever a land enters your battlefield, you may have target player lose 3 life. If you do, put 3+1/+1 counters on Obnixilis, so that's good. Thalisse, Reverent Medium. At the beginning of each end step, create X/1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying, where X is the number of tokens you created this turn. Once again, legendary creature. We're trying to make tokens. Gitrog Monster, 6/6 Death Touch for 5 mana. Beginning of your upkeep, sack Gitrog unless you sack a land, so we're going to be sacking lands. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever one or more of your lands are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. That's good, although that one doesn't count per land, it just counts at an instance of when lands hit. Underrealm Lich, great card. I think if you're playing any kind of mill strategy and you have green-black available, you got to play this card. If you would draw a card, instead look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one into your hand, the rest in your graveyard, pay 4 life. Underrealm Lich gains indestructible until end of turn, but you got to tap it. That's a good effect. Kakusho, the Evening Star. Whenever it dies, each opponent loses 5 life. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. Normally in my play group, it seems like lately we've only been able to get 2 other players, so it's only been 3-player games. And obviously that's not as good in a 3-player game than it would be a 4-player game. But Kakusho is just, there are so many ways in this build where you can abuse this and keep like sacking him and then get him back out from the graveyard and just like drain your opponents and you gain life, so it's pretty good. Sun Titan, whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can return a permanent mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That includes lands. Serac and Goreclaw, this is one that came out earlier this year. Trample, other creatures you control have trample. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield you control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It gains haste until end turn. So in these colors, we don't have too many ways of gaining haste aside from, like a Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, stuff like that. So the only other one that I know of consistently, there's a legendary artifact that's it's a monument. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but that one I don't play. I thought about it, but I think this is just better. It gives all your other creatures trample, and then if they come in under the battlefield when this thing's already there, they get buffed up and they gain haste. So this is a great card. Titania Nature's Force. 6/6 for 6 mana. You can play forests from your graveyard. We have 13 forests in here. Obviously, you'd rather play this in like a mono green deck probably, but still works. Whenever a forest enters the battlefield you control, you make a 5/3 green elemental creature token. This is a big one. Whenever an elemental you control dies, you may mill 3 cards. We do have some sack outlets in this deck, so that's really helpful, and it's a legendary creature. Yargle and Multani, an 18 power, 6 toughness creature for 6 mana. Has no effect, but we can definitely get use out of that power. Yosei the Morningstar, I believe this is the last creature. Flying 5/5 for 6 mana. Whenever it dies, target player skips his or her next untap step, tap up to 5 target permanents that player controls. Now, if you have stuff like Taste of Karlov, that effect gets doubled. It gets real nasty real quick. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that was not the last creature. We got some more. Sorry. Beladros Witherbloom, one of the Strixhaven dragons. I love him. He's probably my favorite. For 7 mana, he's a 4/4. At the beginning of each upkeep, make a 1/1 black and green pest token with whenever this creature dies, you gain a life. And then the big effect, pay 10 life, untap all lands you control, activate only once each turn. That's a soft once per turn. So if you're able to use that effect and then you can sack Witherbloom and get him back out, he can do the effect again. So that's really awesome. Elishnorn, gotta have Elishnorn here. Boosts all your other creatures by +2/+2. All your opponent's creatures get -2/-2. Great to go against token decks. Emiria Shepherd, I think if you're playing a graveyard deck and you got white, this is one of the best cards you can do. 4/4 flying with landfall. Whenever a land enters your battlefield you control, if the land is a plains, you can grab a permanent from your graveyard and put it onto the battlefield, as long as it's not a land. If the land is not a plains, it goes back to your hand, but it's pretty easy to get the lands that we want in this deck. Shieldred, I think you guys know what that one does, but I'll just explain anyway to any new people to Magic. Swamp Walk, beginning of your upkeep, you return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacks a creature. Now, it's true that Shieldred's not as good as she used to be, but in a legendary big creatures matters deck that's graveyard synergy, I love playing her. She's probably my favorite Praetor. Torsten, founder of Benalia. This is another, when I say new, I just mean newer for me. It's been out for about a year now. Whenever it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 7 cards of your library. Put any number of creatures and or lands from among them into your hand, the rest on the bottom of the library in a random order. When it dies, you make 7 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. So I just like both these effects. We get some card advantage by being able to add some cards from deck to hand when it comes in, and then when it dies, it makes us, 7 soldiers, which we have ways of, increasing that or using those soldiers to our advantage. And, it's got a nice stat line, 7/7 for 7. The last creature, here we go, Vishkal, Blood Arbiter, 7 mana, 5/5 vampire, flying lifelink. You can sack a creature, put X +1/+1 counters on Vishkal, where X is that sacrifice creature's power. I love this kind of an effect. It's awesome. And then here's the thing. You forget sometimes when you use this card, you would think it's removed so many +1/+1s to make something go -1/-1 by that much amount. But you have to remove all the +1/+1 counters on Vishkal to do the effect. So sometimes you lose track and you buff something up, and then you're like, oh crap, that creature's about to wreck me. I got to get rid of it. And it sucks that like this happened to me a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I had to remove 27 +1/+1 counters just to remove a creature that was going to wipe my board. So it is what it is, but it's a great card. All right, let's go to enchantments. I think we run 10 of these. Oath of Druids. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player chooses a target player who controls more creatures than he or she does and is her opponent, his or her opponent. The first player may reveal cards from the top of their library until he or she reveals a creature card. If they do, that player puts that card on the battlefield and all the other cards revealed this way into the graveyard. So what we're banking on here is we are probably going to be playing bigger creatures than our opponents. Plus, we still don't mind having some enchantments, artifacts, lands in our graveyard. So yeah, basically at each player's upkeep, as long as that person that's their turn doesn't control the most creatures, they'll get this effect. And yeah, you basically mill until you hit a creature. And yeah, so it's a good effect. We got Aura Shards. Whenever a creature enters your battlefield, you can pop an artifact or enchantment. That's a May. You don't have to. Choke, one of the cards that I run in every green deck that doesn't have blue in it. Islands don't untap during their controller's untap step. Just some more hate on blue, which is nice. Kethis Crusade. Creature enters your battlefield, put a +1/+1 each creature you control. As you can see, we make a lot of tokens, so that's going to get big pretty quick. Dictate of Erebos. If a creature you control dies, each opponent sacks a creature. That's good. Moldavine Reclamation. If a creature you control dies, you gain a life, draw a card. That's good. Perilous Forays. I've always been looking for a home for this deck, and I've swapped it a few places, but I think this is the spot for it. You can pay 1, sack a creature, search your library for a land with a basic land type, and put it into play tapped, then shuffle your library. We need sack outlets in this deck, so that one's good, in my opinion. And we have landfall triggers, so that's good. Primal Vigor. So here's the thing. You could run, there's obviously doubling season, but that's still fairly expensive. But you could run, like a Parallel Lives or, like something to boost +1/+1 counters. But Primal Vigor, the thing that sucks about it is this works for all your opponents as well. They get this benefit. But in this deck, because we run so many things that make tokens and +1/+1 counters, I just wanted to bang it out with one card and be like, okay, one card does the things that I need instead of having to rely on 2 cards to do that. So just for anyone that doesn't know, if 1 or more tokens would be made onto the battlefield, put twice that many of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters are placed on a creature, put twice that many on a creature instead. Once again, works for everybody. Death's Presence. Whenever a creature you control dies, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the power of the creature that died. So this is kind of like Vishkal, but for every creature. It gives every creature the opportunity to have that effect, basically. Primeval Bounty, last enchantment. Whenever you cast a creature, you make a 3/3 beast. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put 3 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. Whenever a land enters the battlefield you control, you gain 3 life. So I told you, we have synergy with life gain, and that whenever a land enters your battlefield, you gain 3 life. That is really good in this deck with what we can do with that. All right, we'll go to sorceries. Go to Farseek. You can grab a basic land from your library as long as it's not a forest. Rampant Growth. Grab a basic land from your library. Doesn't matter what it is. Cultivate. Search library for up to 2 basic lands. Put 1 to the hand, 1 to the battlefield tapped. Victimize, choose 2 target creatures in your graveyard, sack 1 of your creatures, and then return the 2 you chose to the battlefield tapped. That's good value for us. Death to the Deathless, one of my favorite cards, and I wish I could run it in more decks, but in this deck, because I run green and I can ramp like crazy, I actually can put a lot into the X cost. Each opponent loses 2 times X life. You gain life equals the life they lost this way. So, I mean, I've done this before where this finishes a game, and I know this is not unheard of, but yeah, where you can put, like, I don't know, 8, 10 into this easily, and then obviously you can drain your opponents for like 20 life apiece, and then you gain 40. It's not unheard of. Splendid Reclamation, return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. That's really good. Here's probably the newest card from Wilds of Eldraine. Lich Knights' Conquest for 5 mana, sorcery. Sack any number of artifacts, enchantments, and or tokens. Return that many creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, you know, like I said, we don't run that many artifacts. I'll show you here in a second. You saw the enchantments. We only run 10, so that's probably not what we're going to do for the most part. It's the tokens is the main thing of being able to just, okay, we made, like, you know, 7 tokens, something like that. I can sack 7 tokens for 5 mana and get 7 creatures back from my graveyard. That's great. Boundless Realms, I think if you're playing green and you run a lot of basics like I do, Boundless Realms, great card. However many lands you have when you play this card, you go ramp that many basics from your library, put them onto the battlefield tap. Eerie Ultimatum, this is pretty much the reason why I wanted to make this deck. Return any number of permanents with different names to your graveyard to the battlefield. Obviously, since we're playing Commander, every permanent we have has a different name except for our lands, which we still get a land of each name back. And then the last sorcery is Primeval's Glorious Rebirth, which is a legendary sorcery, so that gets reduced by Kethis. You only can cast this if you control a legendary creature or planeswalker. Return all legendary permanent cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. I think you guys saw we have quite a lot. I mean, I would say all but I think it's like 5 or 6 creatures in the deck are legendary. All right, artifacts. We got Altered Dementia. Sack a creature. Target player puts a number of cards equal to the creature's power from the top of the library into the graveyard. Now, at the beginning of the game, we'll definitely use this for ourselves to mill ourselves, but there comes a certain point where if our creatures get strong enough, we could just mill our opponent out. So that's not unheard of. Alhamrat's Archive. So we have some life gain here. This lets us gain twice that much life, and we need help with card draw a little bit, and it's a legendary artifact, which is nice. But if we would draw a card, except the first one we draw 2 cards instead, which is good. And then the last artifact is Bolas' Citadel. Now, this is not the artwork I wanted. I love the alternate artwork. But this is what I got in the mail. The guy was able to give me my money back. But yeah, this one, really cool. Bolas' Citadel. Bolas' Citadel is not a card that anyone's impressed with, obviously. Like, it goes in, pretty much you can put it in every black deck. But in here, it is a legendary card, so that works. And we do get to gain life. So basically, you look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. If you cast a spell this way, you lose life equal to its mana cost. It does have an ability where you can tap it, sack 10 non-land permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. That normally is not going to happen until like your opponents are within range of dying by that. And the last card on the deck is an instant, Congregate. Target player gains 2 life for each creature on the battlefield. Once again, we can make a lot of creatures, and we do want a little bit of life gain in here. We got the Veto, Thorn of the Duskrows to drain our opponents and some other stuff. So, yeah, that's it for the deck profile. That's it for Kethis. Kethis, you can build the deck a few different ways, and it's kind of whatever legendary creatures you prefer. I just, like I said, my highest recommendation would be don't run legendary cards in here that won't get reduced by his effect. But that's it for now. I hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile. I'll come up to you with some more. I don't know. It might be a while before I do a Magic deck profile, but who knows? I may do Yu-Gi-Oh deck profiles here soon, but we'll see what happens. All right, have a good one, guys.